What if I told you that everything you think makes you happy is actually making you more miserable? Recent findings from Harvard's study of adult development, now spanning 85 years of research, reveal that most people are chasing the wrong kind of happiness, and it's destroying their mental health. This isn't just another self-help theory. We're talking about hard science that tracks real people from teenagers to old age, measuring what actually creates lasting fulfillment versus what just feels good in the moment. Today we're breaking down the latest psychology of happiness with Dr. Mayura Kardos, and this conversation will completely change how you think about joy, pleasure, and what it really means to live a fulfilling life. Because here's what most people don't realize about happiness: the pleasure trap that's destroying mental health. There's a massive neurochemical difference between what most people think makes them happy and what actually creates lasting well-being. When I ask people what makes them happy, they usually mention things like getting likes on social media, buying something new, having a drink after work, or achieving a goal they've been working toward. But here's the problem: these aren't actually happiness. They're pleasure, and understanding this distinction could save your mental health. Let me explain what happens in your brain when you get a dopamine hit from checking your phone versus when you experience genuine connection with another person. When you see those red notification badges or get a new follower, your brain releases dopamine. This creates a quick spike of excitement, but it's short-lived. Within minutes, you're back to baseline or even lower. Your brain starts craving the next hit almost immediately. Now contrast this with what happens when you have a meaningful conversation with a friend or spend quality time with family. Your brain releases completely different chemicals: serotonin, oxytocin, and even endorphins. These create a sustained sense of well-being that can last for hours or even days. The key difference is that dopamine hits leave you wanting more, while these other neurochemicals leave you feeling satisfied and content. Research tracking participants over extended periods shows something alarming. People who primarily sought pleasure through shopping, social media, gaming, or substance use showed significant decreases in baseline happiness levels over time. Their brains literally rewired themselves to need more and more stimulation to feel normal. I've seen this pattern countless times in my practice. Consider the research on hospital patients who had views of nature versus brick walls. Patients with garden views recovered faster, needed less pain medication, and reported better moods. This wasn't about achieving something or getting validation. It was about connection to something larger than themselves. Yet most people spend their days chasing digital rewards instead of these deeper forms of satisfaction. The hedonic treadmill is this phenomenon where people think the next purchase, the next achievement, or the next experience will finally make them happy. But what actually happens is that each time they get what they want, their baseline expectation increases. So they need something bigger, better, or more expensive to get the same feeling. It's like being addicted to a drug where you need higher and higher doses to get the same effect. This is what I call happiness hijacking. Companies spend billions of dollars studying neuroscience to design products that trigger these dopamine pathways. Social media algorithms are specifically programmed to create intermittent reinforcement schedules, the same psychological principle that makes gambling addictive. You never know when you'll get that next like, comment, or share, so your brain stays in a constant state of anticipation. The shopping industry uses similar tactics. They create artificial scarcity with limited time offers and flash sales. They use bright colors, urgent language, and social proof to trigger your brain's fear of missing out. Even the layout of stores is designed to maximize impulse purchases by placing high dopamine items at eye level and near checkout counters. Here's what's really disturbing. Despite having more access to pleasure-inducing activities than any generation in history, anxiety rates have increased by 47% since 2020, and depression rates are up 52%. Young adults aged 18 to 25 show the highest rates of both conditions, and this is the demographic that consumes the most digital entertainment and social media. Your brain's reward system becomes dysregulated when you prioritize instant gratification over meaningful experiences. Think of it like training a muscle. If you only do light exercises, your muscles become weak and can't handle heavier loads. Similarly, if you only give your brain quick dopamine hits, it loses the ability to appreciate slower, deeper forms of satisfaction. I had a client, a marketing manager, who realized she was spending 4 hours daily scrolling through Instagram and online shopping. She felt constantly restless and couldn't focus on conversations with her husband or children. When we tracked her mood throughout the day, She noticed that she felt worse right after these pleasure-seeking activities, not better. The difference between feeling good temporarily and experiencing lasting well-being comes down to what neuroscientists call the brain's prediction error system. When you expect something good to happen, and it does, you get a small reward. But when something unexpectedly good happens, especially something that involves connection or meaning, your brain releases a much larger cascade of positive neurochemicals. This is why spontaneous acts of kindness feel so good, or why unexpected quality time with loved ones creates such lasting memories. Your brain isn't prepared for these experiences, so it responds more strongly. Meanwhile, planned pleasures like scheduled shopping trips or anticipated social media sessions create smaller and smaller responses over time because your brain learns to expect them. The framework for understanding genuine happiness neurologically involves 3 key systems. First, the connection system, which involves oxytocin and vasopressin and activates when we bond with others. Second, the meaning system, which involves serotonin and activates when we contribute to something larger than ourselves. Third, the growth system, which involves BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and activates when we learn new skills or overcome challenges. Real happiness isn't a feeling you chase. It's a state you create through specific behaviors and mindset shifts. People who understand this distinction and focus on connection, meaning, and growth instead of pleasure, achievement, and external validation report significantly higher life satisfaction scores and show measurably different brain patterns on neuroimaging studies. The most successful interventions I've seen involve helping people recognize when they're seeking pleasure versus when they're building genuine happiness. It's not about eliminating all pleasurable activities, but about understanding their role and not depending on them for your emotional well-being. When you can distinguish between these 2 types of experiences, you can start making choices that actually improve your mental health instead of undermining it. But this raises a crucial question. If pleasure isn't the answer, what does decades of scientific research actually tell us about lasting happiness? Harvard's 85-year study reveals the happiness secret. The Harvard study of adult development provides the definitive answer. This research has been tracking the same group of people for over 85 years now, making it the gold standard for understanding what creates lasting happiness. What makes this study extraordinary is that researchers have literally followed these participants from teenagers all the way to their 80s and 90s, measuring everything you can imagine about their lives. They started with 724 participants in 1938. Some were Harvard undergraduates, others were working-class boys from Boston neighborhoods. The researchers tracked their careers, relationships, health, finances, family lives, hobbies, everything. They conducted interviews every 2 years, collected medical records, took blood samples, did brain scans, and even interviewed their spouses and children. This level of detail over such a long period is unprecedented in psychological research. The current director, Robert Waldinger, has released findings that contain shocking revelations challenging everything our culture teaches about success and happiness. When researchers analyzed all the data to see what predicted life satisfaction at age 80, the results were stunning. Wealth had almost no correlation with happiness. Fame and professional achievements showed minimal impact on life satisfaction. Even physical health, while important, wasn't the strongest predictor. The Harvard findings show clear patterns when comparing participants who achieved conventional success versus those who lived modest lives, but scored highest on happiness metrics. Participants who accumulated significant wealth, achieved professional recognition, or gained public prominence often struggled with mental health issues, relationship problems, and a persistent sense that something was missing from their lives. The study documented that external achievements provided temporary satisfaction, but failed to create lasting happiness. In contrast, participants who maintained strong relationships throughout their lives consistently reported higher happiness levels. One participant worked as a public school teacher his entire career, never earned more than a middle-class income, and lived modestly. But he maintained close friendships from childhood, had a stable marriage volunteered in his community, and spent time with his grandchildren every week. His happiness scores were consistently among the highest in the entire study. This led researchers to identify what they call social fitness. Just like physical fitness requires regular exercise and attention, social fitness requires consistent investment in relationships. The study shows that social fitness is more important than physical fitness or financial fitness for predicting happiness and longevity. The neurological findings are particularly fascinating. When researchers used brain imaging technology to scan participants who had strong social connections versus those who were isolated, they found completely different activation patterns. People with quality relationships showed increased activity in areas associated with reward processing, emotional regulation, and stress recovery. Their brains literally looked different. The connected participants had higher levels of oxytocin and vasopressin, hormones that promote bonding and trust. They also showed lower levels of cortisol, the stress hormone that damages the immune system when chronically elevated. Most remarkably, their brains showed signs of neuroplasticity well into old age, meaning they continued growing new neural connections longer than isolated participants. The study's findings on loneliness are particularly alarming. Researchers discovered that chronic loneliness has significant health impacts comparable to other major risk factors. Lonely participants showed increased inflammation markers, compromised immune function, and higher rates of cardiovascular disease. The health impact of loneliness was substantial across all age groups. But here's the most important finding from the entire study. When researchers analyzed all the data to identify the single strongest predictor of happiness at age 80, they found it wasn't health, wealth, career success, or even current relationships. The strongest predictor of happiness at age 80 was relationship satisfaction at age 50. This means that the investments you make in your relationships during middle age determine your happiness 3 decades later. Participants who prioritized their marriages, maintained friendships, and stayed connected to family members during their 40s and 50s were significantly happier in their 80s, regardless of their health or financial situation. The study also revealed that happiness levels follow a predictable pattern throughout life. Participants typically reported highest happiness in their 20s, experienced a dip during middle age, then saw happiness levels rise again after age 60. This U-shaped curve appears across different cultures and economic backgrounds, suggesting it's a fundamental aspect of human development. What's particularly interesting is that participants who understood this pattern and actively worked to maintain relationships during the middle age dip were more likely to experience the upturn in later life. Those who became isolated during difficult periods often remained lonely and unhappy, even as their external circumstances improved. Recent updates include brain imaging data that shows how social connections literally change brain structure over time. Participants with strong relationships developed larger prefrontal cortexes, the brain region responsible for emotional regulation and decision-making. They also maintained more robust neural networks between different brain regions, which is associated with better cognitive function and emotional resilience. The study distinguishes between hedonic happiness, which comes from pleasure and positive emotions, and eudaimonic happiness, which comes from meaning and purpose. While both types contribute to well-being, the research shows that eudaimonic happiness derived from relationships and contribution to others provides more lasting satisfaction and better health outcomes. The researchers concluded that feeling connected to others reduces the risk of dying at any age and dramatically improves the chances of living healthily. The participants who invested in relationships didn't just live longer, they lived better, with more energy, better mental health, and greater life satisfaction well into their final years. This research fundamentally challenges our cultural assumptions about what creates a good life and provides a roadmap for building genuine happiness based on decades of real-world evidence. Yet despite having access to this knowledge, we're facing unprecedented levels of loneliness and mental health challenges in modern society. The digital age happiness crisis. The root of this crisis lies in how technology has fundamentally altered our relationship with connection itself. We live in the most connected era in human history. People have hundreds of friends on social media, instant messaging, video calls. Yet recent surveys show Gen Z prioritizes mental health more than any previous generation, with rising anxiety levels becoming a defining characteristic of young adults today. This is exactly the paradox that's defining mental health in our current era. Recent research shows concerning trends. The average person now spends significantly more time looking at screens than just a few years ago, and this increased digital consumption correlates with higher rates of depression and anxiety symptoms across age groups. We're experiencing what I call the connection illusion. People think they're socializing when they comment on posts, send emoji reactions, or participate in group chats. But neurologically, these digital interactions create completely different brain responses than face-to-face conversations. When you have an in-person conversation, your brain releases oxytocin, vasopressin, and endorphins. These chemicals create lasting feelings of bonding and contentment. Digital interactions primarily trigger dopamine, that quick hit we discussed earlier that leaves you wanting more. Recent brain imaging studies compared what happens when people interact digitally versus in person. Participants who spent an hour video chatting showed minimal activation in their brain's reward centers. But the same people having coffee together for an hour showed significant increases in areas associated with empathy, emotional regulation, and social bonding. The difference was dramatic. Social media platforms have created artificial social hierarchies that trigger our most primitive survival mechanisms. Your brain evolved over thousands of years to live in small groups where your social status directly affected your chances of survival. When early humans were rejected by their tribe, it often meant death. So your brain developed powerful systems to monitor social acceptance and status. Now these ancient systems are being activated by Instagram likes, follow accounts, and viral videos. Your brain interprets low engagement as social rejection, triggering the same stress responses our ancestors felt when facing actual threats. Research shows that users check their phones hundreds of times daily, and each check creates a small stress response as they evaluate their social standing. I worked with a 26-year-old influencer who had 50,000 followers, but felt completely isolated. She spent 6 hours daily creating content, responding to comments, and monitoring her metrics. But she hadn't had a meaningful face-to-face conversation in weeks. Her cortisol levels were chronically elevated, and she experienced panic attacks whenever her posts received less engagement than expected. Her brain was treating every low-performing post as a social crisis. This connects to what researchers call continuous partial attention. Most people can no longer focus completely on any single interaction because they're mentally tracking multiple digital conversations, notifications, and feeds simultaneously. Studies show that most people check their phones during face-to-face conversations, and this behavior prevents the deep neural synchronization that creates genuine connection. When you're physically present but mentally distracted, the other person's brain picks up on this unconsciously. Mirror neurons, which help us empathize and connect, become less active when they sense divided attention. This creates shallow relationships where people feel heard, but not truly understood. Over time, this pattern erodes the trust and intimacy necessary for happiness-boosting connections. The compare and despair culture has reached epidemic proportions. People curate their online presence to show only their best moments, vacations, achievements, happy relationships. But when you scroll through these highlight reels daily, your brain starts believing that everyone else lives a perfect life while you struggle with ordinary problems. Research shows that the vast majority of social media users report feeling inadequate after spending time on platforms, even when they intellectually understand that posts don't represent complete reality. One of my clients, a 32-year-old teacher, described her social media experience as watching a movie where everyone else was the star and she was just an extra. She spent her lunch breaks scrolling through friends' vacation photos while eating a sandwich at her desk. This daily comparison ritual made her feel like her life was boring and unsuccessful, even though she was actually content with her career and relationships when she wasn't comparing them to others. The attention economy profits from keeping people in states of dissatisfaction because dissatisfied people engage more with content and advertisements. Platform algorithms specifically promote content that triggers strong emotional responses, anger, envy, fear, or outrage, because these emotions drive clicks, shares, and comments. Research reveals that platforms earn significantly more revenue from users who report feeling anxious or inadequate compared to users who report feeling content. This creates a vicious cycle where people seek connection on platforms designed to make them feel disconnected. The more isolated they feel, the more they scroll, and the more isolated they become. Breaking this cycle requires understanding that digital platforms are businesses, not social services, and their primary goal is capturing your attention, not improving your well-being. But there are practical strategies that research shows can restore natural happiness mechanisms. Studies of participants who implemented specific changes to their technology use found significant improvements. Those who designated phone-free zones in their homes, turned off non-essential notifications, and replaced 1 hour of screen time daily with in-person activities showed substantial improvement in mood scores within 6 weeks. The most effective intervention was what researchers call relational investment time. Participants spent 30 minutes daily in focused, phone-free interaction with another person, having coffee with a colleague, playing with their children, or calling a family member. This simple practice activated the same neural pathways that long-term happiness research identifies as crucial for well-being. Another successful strategy involves conscious consumption of digital content. Instead of mindlessly scrolling, participants learned to actively choose what they consumed online. They unfollowed accounts that triggered comparison, limited news consumption to brief periods daily, and replaced passive scrolling with active creation, writing messages to friends, sharing encouraging comments, or creating content that reflected their authentic experiences rather than trying to impress others. The research also shows that understanding the neuroscience behind digital addiction helps people make better choices. When you recognize that the urge to check your phone is your brain seeking a dopamine hit, you can redirect that energy toward activities that provide deeper satisfaction. Taking a walk, calling a friend, or engaging in a hobby activates reward pathways without creating the crash that follows digital dopamine hits. The goal isn't to eliminate technology, but to use it in ways that support rather than undermine genuine human connection and happiness.